Hi, everybody. I'm Soren Johnson, and welcome to a Q&A with Sid Meier's Sid Meier, who's designer of Pirates, Railroad Tycoon, Civilization, all sorts of good games. Sid just published a memoir, which I just finished reading last night, I enjoyed it. Was up late finishing it. One more page. Yeah, so why did you decide to write a memoir?
Well, I realized that my career is getting longer and longer, and a lot of the questions I get from folks are kind of go back to those days pre-internet, before everything that ever happens was recorded. So I thought it'd be interesting to tell some of the stories behind the games. A lot of times when you play a game, you kind of assume that was the way it was intended to be, and everything was a straight shot from the very beginning to the end. But often there's a kind of a winding path to get to the final game, and some of those stories are kind of interesting. Also, I kind of got the sense that I was there at the beginning in a lot of ways, and this is a small part of our origin story, which kind of hasn't really been told yet. So I thought putting it into a book, might be worthwhile.
Yeah. How much sort of archaeology did you have to do, like, to figure out stuff about these games you haven't touched for decades?
Well, I collaborated with Jennifer Noonan, and we had a lot of conversations, and I kind of talked about things from my point of view, and she actually added a lot of research in terms of other things that were happening in the video game world at the time. She really researched the whole nuclear Gandhi meme, and did a lot of great work to kind of flesh out, what was happening besides the things that I was doing.
Yeah, I know that it's, people have mentioned that people have tried to debunk that a couple of times, but it's nice to know it's like, it couldn't be more officially on the record now that you devote almost half a chapter to it. So,
well, actually, we recently fired up the computer that the original Civ was programmed on.
Right.
And haven't been able to get the source code off of that yet.
Right.
But I'm really wondering whether I should try to actually get the actual source code,
right,
and
show people.
And see what the actual code is. In fact, I was thinking, that's gonna be my next book, the annotated source code to the original Civilization.
Yeah, no, that would be great. And you're 100% sure you didn't slip an unsigned integer in there?
I think it's actually fun to keep it a mystery, because people read so much into that. It's just become part of the lore of Civ. Right. So
it is
anything is possible,
Right, sure. It is true though that you subtracted 2 from the value when they're in a democracy. Like, that part is correct.
I'd have to go back to the source. It's been a number of civilizations ago that
right. Well,
and many years.
All right. Well, I thought the story was closed, but now it looks like the story is opening up again. So
yeah, it'd be a shame. It'd be a shame to close this story.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I also really liked in the memoir that you started with the classic Bill Staley meeting, right, in Vegas, but then you actually rewind before then, right, because a lot of these sort of like mythic events where everything can be traced to this one origin story, it's easy to just like assign everything to that. But you pointed out that there was actually a bunch of games that you'd made before that, and that you had, in a weird way, kind of been on this trajectory for a while.
Yeah, I loved games. I mean, even as a kid, I played lots of games and studied computers in college, and kind of combined those two passions of mine to make games. And I probably would always have made games even if I hadn't met Bill, but I'd probably still be making them in my bedroom as opposed to making them as a computer studio. So Bill, the meeting with Bill was significant in that it founded Firaxis and gave me kind of an outlet for my game design passion. But I was making games before that, and I probably would have continued just for my own amusement had I not met Bill and we found MicroProse.
Yep. Now, one of there's an article that came out a couple of weeks ago when you're doing your interview rounds on the memoir from The Independent that included kind of the clickbaity headline that you don't think you would make Civilization today and you're not even sure you would play it today. Can you go into further detail there, like what exactly you meant by that?
Well, what I was trying to say was that things have changed a lot in the industry, and that we've kind of, civilization created the 4X genre in a lot of ways, and had that genre not been created, I think it would be difficult to kind of create a brand new genre today. The civilization kind of invites you to play, to kind of invest a fair amount of time, in a world where attention spans have decreased. And that there's so many games out there that it's hard to find a game that's going to take a little time to kind of grab you and get your attention. So I think that I think civilization came around at a kind of an ideal time. There was a synergy between what we had learned with Railroad Tycoon, the IBM PC becoming kind of the standard platform with its capabilities, and SimCity having been out there, and kind of a receptivity to this new kind of God gaming genre, and what's next in that genre. I think that today there's so many games that a new quirky game where things weren't blowing up rapidly would have a much harder time kind of finding traction. And right. I think the game came around at a good time in terms of some synergies that allowed it to become successful. I think that it's the community, as you well know, has supported us enthusiastically. And without that support, if we were trying to introduce the game today without the community support, it would be a lot harder to kind of get that visibility and traction, I think, than when the game was originally released.
Yeah. And the way I look at it is, 1990, 1991 was kind of I think a special time in that the limits of what you could do in a computer game matched up very well with kind of like the limits of what kind of like the average game player could handle. Because the truth is, like, in many ways, I think that the games have bifurcated. There's like Candy Crush on one side, which is stuff, like very instant gratification. But on the other side, you have, the Paradox games are very, very successful, and they're way more complicated than Civilization ever has, even in like kind of the 6th iteration. So like if you start making complex games now, it's kind of hard to know where to draw the line, like when to stop adding stuff to the game.
Yeah, question would be, would games have gone down this complex path had there not been a Civilization? That might sound a little grandiose, but sure. But I think in a way it made the world safe for strategy. Before that time, strategy was like a dirty word if you applied it to a game. Strategy games were boring and slow moving, and they had hexes and scary things like that. And certainly in my mind, Civilization broke a lot of those impressions, those prejudices against strategy, against turn-based games, against games that kind of took that amount of time to play. So it's possible that we would have a strategy game today had there not been Civilization. But it's also possible.
We'll never know for sure.
Right,
yeah. Well, I think it's probably inevitable that someone would have tried to make a game about all the world history, but the game may not have been nearly as addictive and compelling and popular if it wasn't the one that you actually ended up making. Although that kind of like makes me think of like a further question of like, if you don't think you would design Civilization the way you would now, like, okay, let's say today instead, let's say you never designed Civ, but you would always want to make a game about world history. Would you do it differently now? Like, do you think you would approach the problem a little differently?
Probably not. I think Civ 1 was a good introduction to the 4X genre. I think we didn't think of it in those terms in those days, but the idea of combining military and financial and diplomatic and technological in a kind of each system easy to understand, but them working together to create very interesting complexity. I think if I were to design Civ today, it would be Civ 1. It would be that kind of, in a way, an introduction to the systems, an introduction to what it feels like to manage all these different pieces in a turn-based world where you are constantly projecting into the future. If I do this, this will happen. So it's essential that I think the player really understand the mechanics, understand what's happening, and then be able to project for themselves the different paths they might want to take. So I think that it would be a little bit of an introductory civilization. In a way, I think that looking back, Civ 1 was an introduction to this genre, keeping everything at an understandable, manageable, kind of easy to grasp level.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you talk about this in the book, that you definitely feel like turn-based is an important pillar of that. Do you feel the same way about it? Do you feel the same way about it being a tile-based game?
I think in as far as that lends to this kind of feeling very comfortable understanding the situation. I think that's kind of a pillar of the game, is that you're not questioning what's happening now. You're thinking about what's going to happen next. And to the extent that tiles, allow a very clear, allow you to clearly see, this unit can move here, this unit could attack here, I could be attacked here. To that extent, I think tiles are helpful. Whether they're essential, whether you could have that clarity without tiles, I guess is a bit of a kind of almost an artistic UI kind of question. But I think understanding clearly what the possibilities are is a pillar of the game.
Yeah. Okay. Let's switch gears and talk about sort of game development a little bit in general. Have you ever had game design ideas that are divorced from topic? Because there's always kind of the question of, like, you start with a mechanic and go to a theme, or you go the other way around.
Well, in the early days, Pirates is an example that we figured out how to smooth scroll a map. That was the technology that we'd never had before, and now we can smoothly scroll this map across the screen. And yeah, we kind of said, all right, what do we do with this map? What is this map of? And kind of independently, Arnold Henrik at MicroProse had been pushing the idea of a Pirates game. And so we had that technology, and we had another technology, was this kind of converting a graphic piece of art into a font, which allowed us to compress. It was kind of an early form of JPEG compression, and so it allowed us to bring up all these pictures very quickly. So that became the story part of Pirates, and the smooth scrolling became the sailing part. So a lot of those early games were driven in many ways by kind of a technological advance, either in the hardware or kind of a software discovery. F-15, I figured out how to draw lines in 3D and make an airplane out of them and start flying. I kind of like, the early days, the technology often came first, but combined with subjects that I was interested in. But there was, that we were kind of constantly pushing up against the limitations, which in a way was kind of freeing. And we knew when we were done, when we filled up all the memory, okay, it's time to ship this game. But I think it challenged us to pull the player's imagination in more, because of the limitations of what we could show on the screen. We had to really engage the player's imagination to fill in the missing pieces.
Yeah. In some way, I don't know if you agree with this, but in some way, I'm kind of imagining, recently you've been, a lot of your time has been spent more on mobile games or console games. It almost seems like you've been looking for kind of new limitations, now that there's almost no limitations on PC.
That's possibly, I don't know. I think it's I do my development on the PC, where it's targeted for, regardless of the platform it's targeted for. But I do enjoy the limitation. I guess the limitations in my mind are more that I'm focusing on the gameplay, the decisions. I'm not looking too much at the graphics, et cetera, et cetera. So that early part of the game development, where you're focusing on the core game elements and finding the fun, as it were, are kind of platform independent because you're never pushing the the limits of your technology in your prototyping.
Right. Can you talk about a little bit about the Valley of Despair, which is something I thought you might get into more in the book, but I know I've just from knowing you personally, it's something I've heard you talk a lot about.
Yeah, that's a phenomenon that we kind of started to recognize in hindsight, in retrospect, that it always seems like at some point, often like halfway or 2/3 of the way through a project, we enter this valley of despair where things don't seem to be working right, and the deadline is now approaching. Every day it gets a day closer, and things it just worry starts to prey upon you. And I guess my theory though is that a little bit like the uncanny valley effect, that in the early part of a project anything is possible. You don't expect what you're playing or what you're seeing to represent the final game. So in your imagination, you're filling in all the missing graphics, all the missing gameplay. And there comes a point where you say, I can't do that anymore. We have to actually make this game. We have to actually create these graphics.
Yeah.
And that might trigger the valley of despair when you kind of look at what you actually have versus what you imagined it would be. And it's not there yet. But but amazingly, we've kind of seen, in my experience, we've seen it in almost every project. And actually, I'm curious whether it's only in video games and computer games, or whether it applies to other, like a movie or something, or other, writing a book. I wonder in other, kind of other art forms whether they have their own particular valley of despair.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. I kind of feel like it's an important concept to talk about, because I think probably a lot of smaller independent teams go through this a lot, and probably there's a lot of projects that get abandoned because it takes a lot longer to finish games now. So that valley of despair is no longer months as it might have been for you, but years. It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, our next question is, well, how do you solve the valley of despair? I think. And the only thing I can think of is just keep on going. I guess understanding it's not unusual is probably helpful. That most games, your favorite game probably went through its own valley of despair. So there is hope the other side of the valley.
Yep. Speaking of advice, if you were say 18, and enterprising, a graduate who's loves video games, wants to get in the industry, is probably going to go get a CS degree. Like, what would your advice be? Like, what would you do if you were that person nowadays?
Well, very simple.
Try to be specific. I know the easy answer is go make a game, right? But that's very general.
Okay, a couple things. I think these days we have platforms like Unity and Unreal, which kind of allow us to leapfrog a lot of the early development stuff that generally bogs us down. So I think becoming familiar with those is certainly important. Another thing is to have interests outside of computer gaming, that you bring some sort of a fresh perspective to gaming, not just copying your favorite game or combining two of your favorite games and claiming that's a new game. What is your interest? What is your passion outside of computer games? And bring that into to the game that you design. Understand that it doesn't have to be graphically awesome, or that those things come later once you have found the fun. And I guess that idea of finding the fun is essential. Make sure that the game that you're creating, in spite of perhaps its limitations in terms of graphics and sound and a UI and things like that, is fun, and of course has many interesting decisions.
Yeah. Speaking of interests outside of games, you devote a whole chapter to Bach in your book, and I kind of want to inquire about, like, what would it take to get CPU Bach running on an iPhone, or even just to open source the code so like it's not locked away on this very old console?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because I was actually in contact with Kerry Wilkinson, who did the port to the 3DO back in the day, and he sent me an emulator package, basically, that I was able to get it running on a PC So, Soren, I can set you up with that.
Okay, cool. Well, I think you should set everyone up with that. That would be interesting.
I thought about like creating a website where 24/7 CPU Bach is there, CPU Baching away, and I wonder what it would take to do that, but probably doable. I guess we have to see who owns the whatever it is about that. Anyways, thank you for asking about CPU Bach.
Well, I mean, it's such a unique project because I think that, even though you had this huge interest in Bach and music in general, like you had to be just in the right place in your career where, you completely did not want to make a normal game, at the moment. And also a company would just be like, okay, Sid, you have the right to do whatever you want to. So like, it's very rare someone could make a game like that. So that actually makes it a very special project.
The stars did align in a kind of a special way at that time, but I think it was also a reflection of we didn't know where the limitations were. I know, Chris Crawford was talking about an interactive novel where computer games would replace literature. Sid Meier was talking about CPU Bach, where computers would replace music. So I think we were at a time when we didn't really know where the limitations were. And it was kind of, maybe this could work, maybe this is going to make some great music. I think we were pushing the boundaries further and further. I think Civilization gave us, encouraged us to do that because we felt it was a boundary pushing game. And it seemed like the hardware was getting better, more and more people were getting involved. So we were going to see how far we could push these boundaries of what you could do with a computer to take over the world, basically.
Yep. Let me ask a very, very high level question. And, the answer, just to upfront, your answer can't be the dinosaurs game. But, if late night, if you're, thinking over your career, do you have any specific regret, some path you could have taken that you didn't, that, you think about sometimes?
It's very hard to complain in my life. No, I think the answer is no. In fact, it's not even the dinosaur game. I think I've learned more from not doing the dinosaur game or having that kind of experience with the dinosaur game than I might have had it been successful. But I think, every step along the way, even though it really wasn't planned and there was no long-term plan, kind of led to, some games that I'm very proud of. So I don't really have any kind of specific regrets.
Yeah. When you, as you saw video games develop and, and grow, what are the games that jumped out at you where you're really just like, I wish I had designed that game?
Well, the first one was probably Tetris. Like, oh man, I probably could have made that in an afternoon. But
efficient use of your time.
Seven Cities of Gold, fantastic game. Really inspired me to think bigger and bigger and epicer. Now we say just make it epic. Why not? Just make it epic.
I don't know if you remember. I mean, I'm sure you don't remember, but I remember when I interviewed at Firaxis, you asked me what my favorite game was, and I was too shy to say Pirates, so instead I said Seven Cities of Gold, which turned out to be a very
good
very good choice for you.
Minecraft, fantastic game. I like to play racing games, Gran Turismo. That's just a particular fun change of pace thing for me. But I think those were SimCity probably would be another one that really kind of inspired me. But,
yeah, a couple of those games are like keys to very important games that you made later.
True. That I think that's part of the game designer mentality, is to play a game and say, this is how I would have done it. And let's call that inspiration.
Okay. So I've heard you say a couple times, and I'm pretty sure you say in the book that you're okay that if your tombstone said like Sid Meier, designer of Civilization, right? Like you sort of major piece with that. So let's imagine you had two tombstones, or maybe a bigger tombstone. What would the other one say?
I think the games that I look on with the most fondness, in addition to Civilization, are Pirates, Railroad Tycoon. I think those were games that kind of broke the mold in a lot of ways. Kind of opened up new territory. Were kind of unexpected. Silent Service, perhaps, but games that really came together well. We had a fun time making them, but also kind of broke some new ground in the industry. So my second tombstone would probably have Pirates and Railroad Tycoon on there, and they're also kind of in a way a little bit of a golden age. Working with Bruce Shelley at MicroProse in some of the the best years at MicroProse, when we were basically trying to establish this industry. Today we know video games are going to be around for a little while. Yeah. In those days, it wasn't quite as sure. We had gone through like the console boom and bust, and so just kind of being part of this process of creating this industry is how I remember those days. Yeah. When I think of my output as a designer, I try not to think too much about the fact that it was a 4-year span. You released Pirates, Railroad Tycoon, and Civilization, and snuck in Stealth Fighter and Covert Action for good measure. You were busy. Well, we only had so much memory, so when it was full, we were done. Yeah. All right. Well, we're almost done here. So, as kind of a last question, why, at a high level, why is it that you decided to devote your working life, your career to making video games? Well, I think the bottom line is, I think as a lot of designers, we design the games that we want to play but haven't been designed yet. So from the very beginning, whether it was F-15 or Solo Flight or Silent Service, whatever, these were games that I wanted to play, but nobody had written them yet. So I kind of had to learn how to do that, understand the technology, and then write the games and kind of learn what made good games. So I think it was just this desire. The inner gamer in me became the inner game designer in me, and it turned out to be a career. Yep. If we have a tiny bit of time here left, I will also say that I kind of gasped at the part of the book where you talk about finishing up Railroad Tycoon, and you implemented the AI in the last month of development. Is that right? Maybe the last couple of weeks. Yeah, we realized that it was a little too leisurely. You could kind of take your time, and there was no kind of incentive to measure yourself against something else. So we added other railroads, kind of pretending to have the same problems that you had, et cetera. So you could kind of measure your progress, make it a little more of a game. But it was done in a very quick and haphazard fashion. Yeah. But it accomplished the purpose, and it perhaps taught us that if you've got a good idea, it's going to make the game better. Just slam it in there, even though it's time to ship. Was there no discussion at some level where you said, "Hey, Bill, we were deciding to add AI to the game. Could we maybe get an extra month here?" No, we were out of memory. There would not have been any space to create all this AI for the railroads. They just did the most basic things, but you knew they were out there, and they might get to that city first, so you better get moving. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for talking about your memoir, and I hope everyone checks it out. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.